We're really grateful to have you here for our workshop, Art Heals, How Art Making Promotes Resilience and Wellbeing with Dr. Irene Renzenbrink. Irene, it's a treat to have you here. I know this is going to be beautiful and nourishing to all of us. I'm going to share a little bit about Irene. We'll go into some housekeeping stuff, and then I'll get out of the way and let her take it from there. So Irene is a social worker, art therapist, and Australian pioneer in the field of grief counseling and hospice and palliative care. She herself was diagnosed with GPA vasculitis in 1998 at the age of 48. After 3 relapses over this period, she is hale and hearty and attributes much of her well-being to creative arts activities and therapy. She's very impressive. She completed a PhD in Expressive Arts Therapy at the European Graduate School in Switzerland in 2018, and she published a book called An Arts-Based Approach to Healing, Loss, and Grief, Working with Individuals and Communities Across the Spectrum of Loss. She published that in 2021. She's going to bring some of that wisdom to us here today. So let's see, housekeeping, Irene, what do I need to say? Oh, I guess the first thing is Irene is going to take questions from you if you have at the end. So throughout at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a little boxes that say Q&A. If you can place your questions in there as opposed to the regular chat box, that would be wonderful. And we'll try to take as many questions as we can at the end of today's workshop. The other thing is we're going to get a chance to do an art making activity. So if you can have 3 sheets of A4 like computer paper and something to draw with, whether it's markers, pens, oils, pastels, anything you want, but a pen or a pencil would work fine too. But as we've shared, no previous artistic experience is necessary. This will be accessible to all. I guess I will toss it to you now.
Wonderful. Maybe people can put where they're from in the chat. I'm just thinking if the numbers allow, but great to be here, and thank you, Jennifer and Ashley, for all the planning. And we, I think we had to postpone when I had COVID last year, and I was in Canada at a conference, and half the delegates came down with it, which wasn't good, in Halifax, Nova Scotia. But I'm not sure about hale and hearty. I think as the colder weather comes here, we're in fall time here in Australia, in Melbourne. I just have had lots of aches and pains, and I've just made an appointment with my GPA specialist just to make sure that everything's okay. I've had neuropathic or vasculitic peripheral neuropathy in the past, so we all have to be careful and be watchful, and that's something I guess that's familiar to those of you who do have a form of vasculitis. So I will say a little bit more about my own experience as we go along. So I'm going to share my screen now and just let's see, we're going to look for how to get started. It's always a bit of a challenge with this technology. Just got to get this screen out of the way. Okay, well, Zoom's a wonderful thing when it all works. When we did, here we go. Very wonderful way of keeping people together during the pandemic anyway. We were just talking about that earlier. So just going to, can you all see the screen now? Yep. Now I can't see anyone, so I'm just feel like I'm talking to myself, but that's the thing we have with Zoom. But Meryl Streep at a Golden Globes paid tribute to her colleague Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia from Star Wars, who'd once said to her, "Take your broken heart and make it into art." And that's been my motto, I guess, for many years now. And I think we need to just remember the resources that we have within us as we struggle with all kinds of losses in our lives. I'm just trying to get this first slide to go forward. Yeah, now, this is what one of our cartoonists in Melbourne, Michael Loonig, has done with his sort of interesting work of looking at the world through an artist's lens. But we all have broken hearts according to what's happening in the world, what's happening in our family, in our communities, in our own personal lives. And there's always something that's uniquely yours, isn't there? And I think we need an understanding of loss and grief and how to cope. And we need love and support and information, I think, that helps us to move through these experiences. In Australia, where we have dreadful forest fires, bushfires, as we describe them, I thought I'd mention just how devastating the last fires were. This last summer has been very mild in terms of heat waves, which is something we're thankful for. But when you think of all the animals that have died, there's much, quite apart from all the people and the houses that are destroyed and the businesses and livelihoods. So just to put that into context in a global way to begin with, I just thought I'd share with you that my inspiration for writing the book that I did, which is based on my PhD in Expressive Arts Therapy in 2018. The book was published in 21. It was all really to engender a sense of hope in the face of dreadful experiences, including fire. And in the bush, the new growth comes almost immediately after the fires have come through. And I think in a personal sense, there's also there are glimmers of hope even in the most devastating losses. This is a friend of mine, Sarah Miles, who lived in New Zealand when the earthquakes did so much damage. And she made what she called hope boxes. She did a lot of embroidery. Can you see? Sometimes I find it amusing that her dreadlocks look a lot like her hope boxes. And she's used the art to help her find a sense of calm when she was struggling with the after effects of the damage to her home and the applications for compensation, which were adding another sort of level of trauma, I think, to the whole experience. She felt that the stitching and the sewing was a calming activity, and some of you might know that if you're quilting people or you have all sorts of hobbies, you know already that there's a kind of mindfulness and meditative experience when you immerse yourself in an activity. She recreated the Canterbury Cathedral in Christchurch, in New Zealand, on the South Island. She found that so helpful. So I'm just wondering what you find helpful in your life as we go along. I wonder if you could think about that. What are the things that you do that are nourishing and that help you to cope with difficult circumstances? For me, it's been photography to a large extent. I lived in Canada on the prairies in Saskatchewan on and off for 25 years. My husband was Canadian, and after he died 3 years ago, I settled in Melbourne, Australia, and I've gone back to visit family, but this is now my home. But I found this amazing quotation by a New Zealand writer, Catherine Mansfield. How hard it is to escape from places, she said. However carefully one goes, they hold you, and you leave bits of yourself fluttering on fences, the little rags and shreds of your very life. And I was struck by that quote because I was very homesick, although I was very happy and settling into a new life, new marriage. I found that there was some heartbreaking as well, and this happens when people in this world today, where everyone travels so much, people live on the other side of the world from their loved ones. It can be hard. So this was what I called my frozen fluttering. And this was in late November, before the snow had started to fall, but you could see the frost and there was no movement in these flutterings. I was just intrigued. And these images became symbols, I think, of the fragmentation and the brokenness, and yet as the seasons changed, these flutterings changed. But this is one of the first drawings that I did in my art journal. I do a lot of art journaling. I belong to a group that's based in San Diego. We meet every Thursday. It's called Illuminated Art Journaling with the Expressive Arts Therapy Institute in San Diego. And after my husband's death, I decided to join this group. And the red circles up in that corner are really my blood cells. I just felt at the time of being diagnosed in 1998, I was only in my late 40s, I was quite shocked that for years I'd had symptoms like sinusitis and ear infections, and no one had ever really picked it up. None of the doctors that I saw knew much about vasculitis. And I remember those questions of why me and why now? And someone even suggested it was a form of leprosy, and everyone kind of weighed in because there is no known cause, nor is there a known cure. But there are medications, of course, that help to control the disease. And I've been very fortunate that apart from having what's charmingly known as the saddle nose deformity and hearing loss, I have had lung involvement over the years as well. The cyclophosphamide that I was given in the beginning caused some early bladder cancer, so I've had to keep monitoring that. So I've got several specialists, as I'm sure many of you have, and you know how important it is to have that careful monitoring. And I'm just remembering that I had an opportunity to go to Kansas City on a Friday, just like in the Oklahoma song. It was years ago, and I'm trying to remember whether it was the year 2000, and I went to a Wegener's symposium, or a vasculitis Foundation symposium. I think the organisation might have had a different name then. And it was quite a shock to me to see people who were so ill. And yet there was something comforting about sitting at a table with people who all had little noses, had saddle nose deformities. And I thought one of them had surgery, which I'm just not eligible for. It's too dangerous currently. And she said she felt like she'd lost her badge of honour, which I thought could only happen at a vasculitis symposium. So what's helped me a great deal, I think, has been support, but also this idea from Norman Cousins, who wrote The Anatomy of an Illness, that you don't deny the diagnosis, but you do defy the prognosis, that you just keep living your life instead of living your illness. And while there are a lot of visits to doctors and hospitals, and it's inevitable at times, if that's all you are, I think it gives you, it causes depression, it causes a sort of paralysis, and all the talk is medical talk. And I live in a retirement village with a lot of older people. The average age would be, I think, 82 at the moment, and I'm 74 going on 75. And some people just talk only about their ailments, and we call them organ recitals. You know, I've got aches and pains, and my heart's not doing what it should be, or my lungs aren't working, or whatever it might be. So I love this quote of one of the patients that before I do that, I love living and nature and being outdoors and hearing birds sing. And I think when you have something difficult in your life, you focus on the things that matter. You're not as focused on the trivia. So I do try very hard to be grateful and to notice the little things and not to sweat the small stuff. This is a drawing that I did actually when I was feeling that I was living with a mask, in a sense. We were masked when we were struggling with the pandemic, but there was something about not having to show my nose, and I had a small nose before my nose collapsed, so it wasn't such a devastating thing. But I did grieve the loss of my nose. I used to look at photos of myself before the collapse, and I just felt sad often. And also, if you're breathing through two little tiny drinking straws, and I have also got sort of asthma. It's hard. But not long ago in my art journaling, I did another drawing about my illness, and the blood cells are moving. If you see that, it looks like a pretty healthy rainbow-like arrangement, and I called it integration. And I feel that over these many years that I've had vasculitis, I've been able to integrate the illness into my life. I've come a long way, I believe, and it's not always easy, but I've liked the words of Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, whose books you might be familiar with. I love these two books, Kitchen Table Wisdom and My Grandfather's Blessings. Rachel Naomi Remen was a paediatrician who became a cancer specialist, but she's lived with ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, for a very, very long time. And she wrote a poem, it's the first poem she ever wrote, "Oh Body, for 41 years, 1,573 experts with 14,355 combined years of training to cure yours truly. Wounds, deep inside, I am whole." I think that's the thing that's important, that we remember that part of us, that whole. I worked with a gentleman who had two kinds of cancer, and we did an art therapy session. He'd also had an addiction problem and estrangement from his family. He was a sad sort of fellow, but he did this drawing with some soft pastels, and he called it Life's Ups and Downs. Done some art therapy before when he was in rehab, and he had this experience of being in a group. I think he'd fallen for one of the members of the group who'd rejected him, and that was really what was represented. You can't ever assume that what people draw is you don't know what it's about until you have a conversation. And you might only say, well, tell me about your picture. You don't impose meaning. You don't interpret. That's the way I've been taught. But what intrigued me was this little heart inside another heart. And I think you'll be amazed. What he said was that's the part that's still whole. And that sort of resonates with Naomi Remen's ideas about that, finding that place that's whole. And I find it's through art that I could discover that place. He also did a lovely drawing of a time when he was happier, and he used to go fishing on the river up on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. And I think people can go to happy places in their mind doing some art making. Parker Palmer, who some of you may have heard of, talks about wholeness, not necessarily being perfection, but embracing brokenness as an integral part of our life. And in the world today, as we know, with war and conflict and suffering everywhere, we sometimes lose we lose hope and we feel despairing. And we need to find ways to soothe our souls, I guess, through poetry and story and music. I'm sure you'll all know how important music is, and art. This is another drawing, just giving you a few examples of how people might just sort of demonstrate or show how they're feeling without a lot of words. Sometimes words are exhausting, or you can't even find the words. This is a woman who was terribly ill and close to the end of her life, and she'd lost her home and her work and her, she was, felt her life had imploded, which is sometimes how people feel, I think, when they're ill with a serious and life-threatening illness, that there's just everything's lost. And I worked in palliative care, so the end, of course, is death and not recovery from an illness. But I just thought you might like, and even in the midst of that, this is a woman whose husband had died, and then she was on a cruise, and she was diagnosed with cancer and had to be flown back to Australia from the cruise, ended up in the same palliative care unit that her husband had been in. And yet there was something joyful in her drawings, as well as making cards for her grandchildren. She felt that there are times, looking back, that she was sort of dancing and still enjoying the small things. Another woman whose mother was terribly ill, and she felt she'd sort of lost herself. She said she felt broken, and when I asked her if she could find an image that represented that feeling of brokenness, she drew this cup and saucer, or painted it. She'd never really painted before, but she just loved cups with flowers on them and decorations, and she liked raspberry tea. So this was her drawing. And when I asked her if there was anything else she wanted to add, she, if you'll note, you can see a little line, a broken cup line. She mended the cup with some glue. She picked up the bottle and mended the cup, and it was as if she was mending herself. And sometimes the arts can help people restore that sense of being able to do things, to restore a sense of capacity. And we call it shaping our reality through the imagination, through a kind of imaginative transformation. I hope that makes sense. They do say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Another person who's used art therapy to just remember picnics and going camping. And a woman who was 95 who drew this basket of blessings, which I think is wonderful. I think we assume that older people are used to it and can cope with loss and change. But I think any of you who are in that age group yourself or are caring for elderly parents or friends will know that it can be full of all sorts of struggles. And in the context of a divorce and separation, I've used bleeding art tissue. It's called. You can get it from Amazon. It's the most wonderful tissue paper that's got the colour in. It's not like the tissue paper you use when you're wrapping gifts. But she felt very depressed and betrayed by her partner. And when I asked her where she'd like to be and could she depict another sort of image, it was a garden, and she actually did establish a garden. So you can see that there are just ways of healing. And I did this. This is from a watercolor painting that I did when my mother was in hospital, and she was trying to decide whether to have a pacemaker inserted. And she was 94. That stage, she died 12 years ago. And she said, I feel like a tree and all my leaves are falling off one by one. So I drew this tree of hearts, I call it. And when my husband died, before he died, he had a Parkinsonian condition and had cancer, and radiation into his throat, so that meant that he had difficulty swallowing, and he died of aspiration pneumonia. We had many, many, many episodes in hospital experiences. And he said, I feel like all my branches are falling off one by one. Now, so I made a memory box about a year after his death, and that was a great experience. I spent a lot of time. There's one of the quotes about giving sorrow words, and we do have to share our grief, I think, and tell our stories, but sometimes just making things and going on walks and listening to music and just being and contemplating is a help. I hope this isn't too, this is this is me making my memory box. I'm just so happy when I'm fiddling around with wool and bits and pieces, and just that's the sort of thing that I love doing. I'm going back to art school soon, so another dream fulfilled. Now I'm going to show you, this is a bit confronting, but this is the face of grief, and this is me now. But I was absolutely broken by my husband's death. I hope that's not, I can't see any of you, so I'm feeling a bit vulnerable sharing this, but it just came to me last night that there's a cruel finality in bereavement and death, and the pain of grief, although it's a part of life, is the price we pay for love and the cost of commitment. And this is a quote from a very dear colleague and who died in January, Dr. Colin Murray Parkes. We need to face loss, or we won't be prepared for our own losses or to help others. But, grief is the price we pay for love is often quoted. But it's because we love and because we're attached and because we invest emotionally in other people and places and possessions that we grieve. If we didn't have those attachments and investments, it wouldn't hurt, would it, when those bonds are broken? So just to be aware that when we're going to have a little exercise for you to do now, and I'll give you some examples so that you'll know what's required. But I just think while you're doing it, just be aware of some of the pain in your life and some of the ways you've been able to overcome it. You might be surprised in doing this drawing, as people often are, that there's a kind of shift, a kind of transformation. Grief is a universal human experience. There's no way to escape it, really. Although some people, I think, drown their sorrows. My father was an alcoholic. We migrated from Holland as a family in 1952. And there were some terribly difficult adjustments to make as migrants. And some people thrive and other people don't seem to be able to cope with the losses. I think the World War II, was also very damaging for them. So it's no wonder I became a social worker, I think, sometimes, just trying to help my family in the beginning. So this is what we're going to ask you to do. How we're going for time there. I think we're okay. This is an exercise that I discovered at a conference of art therapy. An art therapist came to a bereavement conference and I did this workshop, and I really enjoyed doing this activity, even though it's about something that is potentially painful. You draw the pain on the first bit of paper, and then on the second piece of paper you draw a healing symbol, and on the third you combine 1 and 2 into a new drawing. So you include elements of the first and second drawing into a new drawing in your third page. Now I'm going to leave that one up, but just after I show you some examples. When I moved into the retirement village, I live in a 19th century cottage, which is very charming, and yet it's tiny. So I had to do a lot of downsizing. And so the pain in my life was the little tiny cottage at the top. And then the healing symbol that I drew, and you can see I just did this with marker pens, was a rainbow. And so in the third drawing, the house seemed to become bigger as I added the rainbow colours, drew the house again. And my conclusion was that my house might be small, but my life is big. I had a really enriching, fulfilling life. So that was kind of an interesting discovery. And this was another one where the pain was, a broken or a heart that, a lot of impinging, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of things going on that were hard. So that was my pain drawing. And then I did a bunch of flowers. And then in the third drawing, I combined the pain turned into a flower. So you can see what I'm getting at there. Now, this exercise that I'm going to give you another example of is by Nicola Sherwin-Roller, an art therapist that I met in Saskatchewan. She does the most beautiful photography. There's some incredible skies in Saskatchewan, huge skies, and you see the weather coming for miles away, and the canola fields are just such a sight to behold. And they say there's a Saskatchewan joke that you never worry about losing your dog because you can see it running away for 3 days. So I always think about that. Now, she did a drawing about COVID and gave me permission to use it in my book. So I'll explain each one. She did sort of lungs for the pain, the difficulty she had breathing, which I thought was a fit with vasculitis for some people. And then the walking in nature was the sort of the remedy. So just to give you a bit more information, she said the image was a response to the pandemic and the fear of not being able to breathe. As someone who experiences asthma from allergies, I understand the feeling of not being able to get enough air. So the sense of air being blocked was represented by the red ball blocking the pathway into the lungs. So that was the pain. Then the second one was her being in nature. She loves walking. She lives in the countryside. I visited her last year. It's just fantastic. She has horses and a dog. And the colours were like a balm to her spirit. I think the snow is only starting to melt now in April. So those winters can be very harsh. So that's the healing symbol. So in the third one, the lung shapes are above the blue water. It's a bit like a hammock almost. The tree roots have connected with them and are breathing for them. So there's a connectivity and a wholeness. So she says, in nature, I can breathe again. So I hope that'll give you some ideas about your 3 drawings.
Yeah, so why don't we take about 5 minutes to do the activity that's on the screen. We'll let you know when you have about, a minute or 30 seconds left. And then you'll get a chance to go into breakout rooms to talk about what you drew or your experience doing the activity. Sounds like we had some rich breakout sessions. So Irene, I'll toss it back to you, and we'll go.
Yeah, I'm just see that. Yeah, now I've still got you on a gallery view, which I like.
Oh.
So, this is one of Nicola's sunsets, and I just love. I don't like living with snow, but I certainly love capturing it in film. Let's see if we can. See, that's when things don't always work the way you want them to. There, just thinking about some of these questions of what takes your breath away, what nourishes your spirit, what moves you and touches you and brings you joy. And I think we've forgotten to add that what comforts you when you're grieving. Right? I just feel that this is something for another, and you could have another whole session on these sorts of questions. But These are difficult questions in some way because we live in a world where we don't talk about these things very much. We don't talk.
No.
I'm a member of a uniting church in Melbourne, and we've just had Easter, and even just the symbols of hope and resurrection, and the way that fits with your own life comes. Everything is called into question. What nourishes you? What keeps us all strong? And if you wanted to just, I'm going to send the PowerPoint with some of these slides, but there's 3 questions that if you've got a bit of paper and a pen handy, I think these are helpful questions, because if in some ways that exercise is an example of what we might call a transformative model of grief. A colleague, John Schneider from Michigan, came up with this, and I think these questions are very helpful in terms of looking at our illness, at our losses in life, just doing a list of questions, answering these questions. What is lost? Make a list. What have you lost? But then also, what is left? What is left in your life that brings you joy and some nourishment and support? And because after my husband's death, I thought, well, I do have my children, my grandchildren, my home, my community. I still have my talents, my gifts, whatever. I'm going back to art school. I've just decided I'm going to do 3 days a week at art school. I'm probably going to be the youngest student. It just sort of just came to me one day. That's what I want to do next. So I'm going to have to let a lot of other things go, but I just want to do it while I can. And then what is possible provides that opportunity to imagine, to create and move forward on a different path. So I think the healing comes through the imagination, and we don't always give ourselves credit for how creative we are. Everyone is creative. It's just that some of us exercise that muscle a bit more than others do. But please keep working on this. And if it's something like a mandala drawing, some of you might be familiar with this. You can get books. You can draw, use a plate, draw a circle, get some coloured pencils or some felt tip pens, and just start in the middle and work your way out. Just do sort of squiggles, and there are videos you can watch to how to do a mandala. It's a sacred art, really. Or a scribble drawing. Sometimes we do, our kids will do this so naturally. Just get one colour and a pen, and just don't take your hand off the paper. Just keep moving it around and around and around. And then if you create, as you can see, a little spaces that you can fill in with colour. There's no standard here. You don't have to be a brilliant artist to do a scribble drawing. Just to keep that in mind. And then here's some benefits if you want to know what the benefits are. It's about being in the moment. It can be soothing and calming, and it's like doodling. And you really must give up on perfectionism. And I want you all to stop saying, I'm no good at art. Just have a go. And the other thing that I looked up the Mayo Clinic, because they're always excellent with their, and when it's a question of building resilience, which is simply bouncing back, isn't it? When you think about it, the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties or adverse circumstances. That's the definition of resilience. To stay connected. I know it's hard sometimes if you are disillusioned with friends or a lot going on in your life, but having those friends that you can really trust, the people who really listen, mightn't be in your family or even your closest. Sometimes your closest friends can be disappointing. but you'll make other friends. I've joined a support group in Melbourne many, many years ago, and I must say I was a bit, they wanted to call us Weggy friends, Wegener's Granulomatosis. But I didn't want to be a Weggy friend. And so it's about finding the people you can be real with and maintaining those connections and reaching out and being a bit more proactive instead of waiting for people to call, and trying to find something every day that gives life meaning, even the smallest things. Learning from the past, I think, means revisiting the past. Sometimes the past isn't ever past.
So you don't get stuck there.
Yeah. There's a lot to work through and to remember and to draw out the wisdom and the lessons. So stay hopeful, take care of yourself, and take action, because we only have this one life to live, and I think some people feel like they're in a rehearsal. And this is another learning cartoon. If the news is starting to get you down, this is one way you can cope with the bad news of the world, which I know really isn't an answer, but I don't watch the news at the moment. It's just hurts too much, and I'm not being irresponsible. When my husband died, this is a flower. This is a native hibiscus in Australia, an Allegheny, and he died at home, so I placed this flower on the pillow, and it's now, I've still got it flowering in the garden. And he always taught me not to forget to smell the roses. So that's my final word to you, really, to just keep going, and don't despair. There's just so much that we can find in our world to give us strength to go on. And I hope this I was a bit, once I was dreading this presentation. I just wanted to know, I wanted to be real. I really didn't want to, especially because it was a vasculitis foundation. How could I talk to you with any credibility if I didn't share something of myself? And I am a bit worried about my symptoms at the moment, and I just had a blood test yesterday, because the anchor, a lot of doctors don't know the tests that are important. I think that's why it took about 10 years for my illness to be diagnosed. Nobody thought to do that special test. So I wish you all, from my heart, the very best of health and well-being, despite the obstacles. And let's see if there's some more questions that people have that we can just spend a bit of time. I think we've got.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I agree. I just wanted to jump in there. If anyone does have a question, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. But yeah, we're so grateful for you. This was heartfelt and intimate, and thank you everyone for participating and sharing and making this what it was. We have one question in the Q&A from Angie, and she wants to know, does your book go more in depth about this or not? I guess more in depth than, I'm not sure, Angie, more in depth than what we discussed today?
Well, my book is full of stories, and ranging from mental health issues to migration to death and dying and disability. It's not a how-to book. It's not if you want to do mandalas or you want to do scribble drawings, or there are other books, better books for that. But it's my life's work that I've put into the book, because I studied art therapy in Vancouver in 2012, and then I discovered this amazing school where I could do a PhD in Expressive Arts Therapy, which is music, poetry, performance, everything. I just felt like and it was in Switzerland, so I was living my Sound of Music fantasy, and I'd never had a pair of leggings, and then I was leaping about in leggings in these sort of music sessions and thinking I'd lost the plot, but it was such a breakthrough in my healing of my life and my illness. So Yeah, the book. Well, I mean, it's on Amazon if anyone wants to follow that up. But it isn't just
Okay.
a to do
I'm
it.
going to put the link in the chat because someone
Thank you.
asked that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, in our journaling group, we might have a prompt, a directive. It might be in springtime. It didn't work for me because it was already autumn, but it was the greening. What was greening in our life? What was coming to life? What were we giving birth to? Sort of in our lives with the new growth. And then everyone did drawings in greens and collage. Yeah. Collage is a terrific thing to do. Like if you had a group of people, you got your scissors and your magazines and your glue, and it's about making something whole out of fragments.
Yeah.
That's a very important activity. We do that in workshops. When we're doing face-to-face workshops, we always do a collage activity. It's more fun to do it together. It's hard to do these things on your own.
Get feedback.
So you like the symbolic nature of all of this rather than it doesn't have to be so literal. It's more like Ashley does poetry. It's more like that.
Yeah, it's like using metaphors. Yeah, when people say I'm on a roller coaster, grief is like a roller coaster. And just you can't always explain exactly what you're going through, but to say it's like a roller coaster.
A metaphor. A metaphor, yeah.
Yeah. Metaphors carry meanings, and you might well, there's so many. Like a storm, the grief is often described in terms of a storm, and sometimes it's torrential rain, and then other times it's gentle rain. I think people relate to images, and maybe children do, but we lose that ability a little bit as we grow up and grow older.
But Suzanne, I love when Irene shared the Parker Palmer quote and talked about how soul truth is so powerful that we need to sort of approach it tangentially through art or poetry or music. But yeah, Irene, again, thank you. Like I said, this is very nourishing. Clearly, everyone else has been feeling that way.
Thank you so much
for joining.
I'm so glad I said yes.
We will be in touch with you all with follow-up with slides, maybe a link to the book so you can get it, and we'll keep you posted about more opportunities. Thank you all. Oh, and this is important. The people who make these webinars possible are our sponsors, Amgen, AstraZeneca, and Novartis. Thank you all. Till next time. We hope to see you all soon.